Hello, beautiful, and welcome to the Moms Talk Sex podcast with me, Maura Yelvington, your host. I am so honored to have the beautiful Meg here with me today. Hello, Meg.
Hello, I'm so excited to be here.
I'm so happy that you're here because I believe this conversation is really going to be an eye opener for a lot of you, and maybe you'll hear something you haven't heard before. So just grab your drink of beverage and come join us to this fun conversation. So, Meg, how about you tell us a little bit about yourself, what it is that you do out in the world?
Yes, my name is Meg Lamm. I am a relationship coach. I work with couples as well as individuals, men and women, creating a relationship that actually works for them, a relationship that they have consciously chosen, a relationship that brings them to the space of them feeling whole. And like a lot of times that means getting back on the same page after being, in a relationship for a long period of time. And then you're like, yeah, we've changed as individuals, we've changed as a couple. Who are we now? We don't even speak the same language. I mean, these are all things I'm sure you hear over and over again, with your guests. Um, and people want to stay together, right? They just don't know how. They don't have the tools or the capacity or the how. So I work with them on that and creating relationships that they want. And sex is absolutely a part of that.
Yes. I love this so much. So, how did you get to become an intimacy or a relationship
I
coach?
got to be a relationship coach because I was married for 14 years and I spent the majority of that time trying to be like the perfect Pinterest wife. And that actually ruined our relationship. It actually didn't work at all. We did wind up getting divorced very amicably, if I might say. We've done a good job. But I was noticing that pattern repeating in myself in my next let's say partnered relationship, not just dating, but like a serious relationship. And I knew that the common denominator was me. So I figured that out finally. And I had to figure out why I was always trying to be something for someone else instead of, and it really came down to the fact that I didn't ever take the time to know me, like to get to know myself, what was important to me, what I valued. How did I like sex? Like I wasn't just like playing out something that I thought I should be, from messaging and indoctrination and programming and things like that. Like, how can we become more authentic for ourselves and then bring that to the relationship so that it's something that's fulfilling for everyone involved?
I love that. Can you share how you got to that realization that maybe there was something going on with you affecting the relationship? Because I feel so many times we throw stones at
Hmm.
everybody else around us. Was there like
Hmm.
an aha moment for you that was like, oh,
So my husband at the time used to say to me, he's like, Meg, you're never satisfied. Like you're always telling me like the next thing that I have to do for me. He's like, you are never satisfied. I was like, that's not true. That is not true. He was right. I was doing all of like, you should exercise, you should work out, you should get a new job, you should quit smoking, like blah, blah, blah. Yes, they're all coming from a place of love, but why wasn't I looking at those things inside myself, right? Like, why was I always looking outside myself to fix? That was my pattern. I was like looking out there, looking out there. And he said to me once, I was telling him a problem that I had with him. And he was like, Meg, you are the person that has the problem. I am not the person that has the problem. Like, I'm okay with this. And I was like, oh, oh, oh. And I went into denial immediately and defending. But a year or two later, after we had been divorced, I wrote him a card and I was like, you're absolutely right. Like, I was always fixing someone else's problem. And I did that in this relationship that I'm telling you that I'm in now with my partner, just always like looking for a problem to fix, right? Inside, like my job, I just wrote a post about this. Ladies, if your role in the relationship is to fix a problem, you have a project, not a partner, right? And
right.
that is what I was doing. I was always looking for a project, which really kept me from being vulnerable and transparent about myself, right? Because
Right.
I never could look inward. It was always out there.
So did you figure out what you were actually avoiding by trying to fix him?
I was trying to avoid probably, not probably, I know for sure feelings of like self-worth, low self-esteem, like constant criticism, things that I felt that I got messages about or just took away from other relationships or even, family from childhood that you kind of don't, if you're not taught how, you don't really face those things, right? You don't face those emotions of shame, guilt. I'd say there's a lot of shame that I was not wanting to deal with.
Yeah. And so what did you do to
hmm
uncover all this? When you realized, okay, I'm the problem,
hmm
how do I fix it? Like what was the go-to?
So first it was a lot of podcasts and reading, books and things like that, which I think are a wonderful start. But then I hired my coach, who is still my coach, and she taught me how to feel.
Mm,
And that was really important. It was
yeah,
such an important step. And we did a lot of what she calls and what I call with my clients now exposure therapy, which means putting ourselves in the position that's we don't like to be in, right? Like doing the thing that we don't like to do, whether it's creating a new habit or trying a new behavior, right? Or being like trusting someone with information about myself that seems very vulnerable and perhaps scary, right? But how can, you hear a lot of women say they feel resentful or they feel frustrated or they feel unseen or unheard or nobody knows them, right? But how can anyone if you don't give them the opportunity? And
right.
many of us don't give the opportunity because there's a lot of fear there with being that vulnerable. I get it. I totally and completely understand. It's a huge risk. But is the risk worth the possible outcome of being closer than ever or knowing someone knowing you even more intimately, than you ever thought possible?
Exactly. I love how you said that because I feel like that's really what we struggle with as women,
hmm
trying to play it safe, but we don't realize how much energy it's sucking from us on a daily basis and how disconnected we are from ourselves.
Yes. Yes, we have not taken the time to know who we are so that we can actually offer a true, authentic version of ourselves to the person we're in partnership with, right? Like if I don't know me, you certainly can't know me.
Exactly.
And then we're operating on a lot of assumptions, and that always gets us into deep doo doo.
So, what do you think are some points, like kind of like warning signals? I mean, before you end up in divorce, right?
hmm
Because in hindsight, you're probably like, oh my gosh, I could have done this and this and this differently. I probably wouldn't end up here. So,
hmm
what are some signals like that that maybe our listeners can be like, oh, okay, I do that? Or,
I would say a big one for me was over giving, like over exerting myself, over committing. I shouldn't even say over giving. I would just like over commit. I would say yes to everything. I would say yes to all the things, the quote unquote, I should be doing. I was shoulding all over myself. That's one of my favorite expressions. And I think that's a huge sign that you are not in a place where you know yourself and you are not being true to the other person or to anyone, right? Like I would even do it with my mom. I did it with my kids. I did it with my kids' teachers. How you do one thing is how you do everything. It was across the board. I was shoulding. So I was being this person I should be. Like, what does the good mom do? What does the good wife do? How does she look? How does she behave? Like even how does she act in the bedroom? But that's not true. That like then I'm being someone that I saw in a movie or on the Pinterest board, or, and if that doesn't resonate deeply with me, I am going to get resentful. So resentment and overcommitting, I think, are two huge things, but resentment is such a wonderful indicator that we are being inauthentic, that we're giving it all away, and that we're not seen for who we are, right? Of course, we're frustrated, but we're not
Yeah.
giving them, like I said earlier, we're not giving them the opportunity. So resentment and overcommitting, I would say, are just wah, wah, huge neon sign. Something's going wrong.
And would you say that that's probably a main cause of what happens in the bedroom then when women don't want to have sex?
Hmm. Hmm.
Yeah.
So, well, like the the resentment, the overcommitting, and then it's like, oh, and now you want me to do this too, right? And it's like, and the guy's probably like, geez, this is an expression of love I have for you, right?
Right.
But so one of the things that I learned about myself was a way, like, I wasn't present a lot during sex. And by that, I mean, like, I'd be thinking about all other things and, like, what am I going to do later? And the grocery list. I mean, people make jokes about that, but it's true.
Yeah.
And so I was never like here, right? And I would say a lot of that was, I mean, even as a young woman, like leading up to other relationships, I was doing a lot of what I thought men wanted, as opposed to becoming familiar with what I really enjoyed. And I thought that like I had some shame around it, even expressing it, right? Like around even knowing, like that we're not supposed to know that it's bad, right? And
Yeah.
so I was just, like kind of be quiet about it. So like I enjoyed sex, but I would say I wasn't present as I certainly am now. And the bravery that it takes to say what you want and to admit it to yourself first. So,
Yeah.
like, taking the time to find out, like, perhaps it's not even always penetration, quote unquote. It doesn't have to be like we have all these ideas and pictures around what sex is supposed to be. And for me, it's just a moment where two people are physically present with each other more than anything else, right? And we're coming together in union and feeding each other in that way and feeding ourselves in that moment. I mean, what's more beautiful than that? Than, showing ourselves, exposing ourselves in that way. But if we don't know what gets us there, we'll always be doing it for someone else instead of ourselves. So of course you're not going to be excited about that. You're not going to be like,
Exactly.
of course you're going to be like, okay, fine, I guess, right?
So how do we get to that point? Right? Like how do you get to that point?
It is again this taking the time to get to know who you are. And I mean, how do women do that in general in their lives? Is it working with a coach? Is it, self-help? Is it looking at all the things, like if you could see your ideal self and who you are in the world and how you behave and how you move through the world, how you talk, what if you could really envision that and see where you are now, where's the difference? What's the bridge? And how would this version of you behave as opposed to the version of you that you are now, right? And what, just noticing the differences and noticing how you got to be where you are. Like, whose stories are you following? Whose ideas are you living out? Like, whose concept of you are you actually living? Is it yours? Was it something your parents told you should be? Was it a religion? Was it a teacher? Like, really understanding how you got to where you are now, and is that you? Whose voice is that? and where do you want to go? Like if you had an authentic voice, if you could speak, and this is just something to do for yourself, right? You don't even have to share this with anyone yet, but
Right.
we have to do it for ourselves first. If you could speak exactly what you want, if you could be exactly who you want to be, and just let your imagination run wild and then see how you can embody that version of you. And it's awkward, it's uncomfortable, it's actually terrible at
Yeah.
first because it's so unfamiliar.
Right.
So there's a lot of letting go. What do we have to let go of in order to be that version of ourselves?
Yeah.
There's a lot of cutting away, habits, behaviors, but also even people, right? I'm sure you have done that as I have in our lives, made conscious choices of people that just aren't aligned with who we want to be.
I think like one of the biggest lessons I learned in my healing journey was how much of me I cut off in order to fit in with everybody
Mm,
else. So one of the biggest parts was really making my body feel safe again so I could be
hmm
back in my body because I was
hmm
just so disconnected from everything because of everything I've been through.
Yes, precisely. Like we just completely dissociate from
Yeah,
ourselves,
we
right? Or
do.
just like I can say I absolutely did that with sex during my college years, because like you said, I just cut parts of myself away
Yeah,
in order to. That's a
yeah,
huge phrase we use I use with my clients. In order to be liked, loved, or accepted, I
right.
was willing to
Yeah,
sacrifice, compromise, shut down
yeah,
my own deepest desires, my own knowing of myself. Um, and so now doing the opposite of that, right? So
yes.
now reclaiming
Yep,
all of that, becoming very familiar with myself. And I think it's an ongoing journey. I don't think it ever ends because I think we are always changing.
right,
Our partners are always changing, our kids, our family, our parents, like our work environment, things are always changing.
right.
And being as true to ourselves as we can through those transitions and those evolutions and really owning what we're coming into so that we can move through life in an embodied way, right? In a way that we
Yes,
are present with ourselves.
exactly.
Hmm
I love that so much because, like you said, we always keep evolving. I feel like it's just another another level up, right? It's only when we stop and we ignore and we shut down that's when we don't evolve. But if we just keep working at it and facing those fears, facing those emotions, facing and dealing with it and healing it and moving forward, we just keep growing and becoming that
Agreed.
best version of ourselves, which is really the key.
Agreed. And what you said is so good. It's so important in that it made me think of another, like, kind of warning sign, right? Like, when you feel things are stagnant, you're probably not being honest, right? Like, when you feel you're stuck, there's something inside of you that isn't being expressed. And, you know, codependency, I work a lot with people that have codependent tendencies, and it's an unintentional form of manipulation, right? It's really a way to get people to love us and, like I said, accept us. Um, and we're not being true. We're not being honest with the person about what we want for whatever fear, rejection, abandonment issues. I understand why it happens. But if we want a person to understand us and know us and to be able to meet our needs in a way that feels good, we have to be willing to risk that. So stagnation and silence and the silent treatment and shutting down, those are all huge signals that something's happening inside of you that isn't being expressed. So even if you don't know what it is, take time, take a minute to get to know it, to become familiar with it.
And I feel like these days it's so easy to just cut it all off, get on your phone, turn on the TV, like it's so easy to get to those places where there's complete disconnect and you're not even aware of it because of the
Mhm.
distraction. And so it's not until like a few years later, we're like, oh, wait, how did we get to this point?
Mhm.
Right. And so it's really like being aware and noticing, okay, is what I'm doing right now, is it me leading the life I want to live? Or is it
Mhm.
me just falling into this routine of nothing I actually desire to create? And
Oh,
where are you going to be on the other side of that?
yes, exactly. Like, so I find a lot of times what happens in situations like this is in when I say like this, I mean when couples have been together for a long time, right? And then they get to this stage where they're like, who are you?
Yeah.
What do we even have in common anymore? Um, is that they don't have a common vision, right? Like they
Right.
don't have a common goal. And if they don't have that, they're not working toward anything. And what you just said reminded me that we always want to have something that we're working toward, right? Like whether it's
Yeah.
a version of ourselves or a version of our relationship, or because if we don't, that's when things just kind of fall flat, right? So what do we want as a couple? How do we want to behave sexually? Like, but opening up the conversation so that we know if we're getting closer to or further from the thing that we want. And that goes for us as individuals too, right? Am I getting closer to this version of myself through every choice? Am I going to be closer? Am I going to have a better relationship with my partner if I pick up this phone right now on the counter and start scrolling? Or am I going to have a better relationship with my partner if I ask him to go for a walk? I mean, I know those seem like very cliche examples, but
But they're true.
yes. And it's things that we do in each moment
Yeah.
of the day and recognizing that we always have a choice. We
Yes.
always have a choice and we are constantly choosing
Right.
either for our relationship or not, either for this version of ourselves or not. Am I getting closer to or further from? As uncomfortable and as hard as it is at times, putting ourselves in those situations and risking doing the thing that will get us closer yields exponentially more satisfying results
Yes. Every single time. I totally agree with you.
every time.
So if our listeners want to get these exponential results, where can they find you?
They can find me on Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, Meg underscore Lamb one, or on Facebook, I'm just Meg Lamb. DMing me is the best way. I have a podcast called This Isn't Working, and it gives just some, I thought that was a funny name. It gives some practical tips, right? About like how you can be closer with someone, just very like common relationship issues and how to overcome them in a less than 20-minute podcast episode. And they can email me, meg@meglam.net.
I love that. Well, thank you so much for this really great conversation. I feel
Thank
like the
you.
energy was so high. And if you guys were listening and tuning in, there's some really amazing gems in this episode. So really listen again and tune into it because I feel like it will open up some hidden things for you that maybe you haven't noticed before. So thank you
Mm,
so much for being here. I really appreciate it.
thank you. I hope your listeners walk away with something really useful for themselves today.
Me too. And thank you, beautiful ladies, for listening. I hope you tune in again next week. Bye.